I guess I should have seen it coming. Looking back, there were signs. Small things at first, things I thought were just the usual bumps in a long marriage. But I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. Vivian and I had been married for 8 years. Not exactly a fairy tale, but not a disaster either. We were comfortable, stable. Maybe too stable, if I'm being honest. Life had a rhythm. Wake up, go to work, dinner together at 7, a couple of shows on TV, and then bed. Yeah, it was routine, but it worked. Vivian wasn't the most emotionally available woman, and I didn't exactly light up her life with some fiery passion. But I always thought that was just how things were, how they worked in long-term marriages. You settle into it. You make your peace. I should have paid more attention. I mean, I noticed the little changes. She started staying later at the office. Then it was, I have a friend I'm meeting up with, some vague excuse that never quite felt right. I'd ask her about it, of course. It's normal, right? Wanting to know what's going on in your partner's life? But Vivian would just give me one of those dismissive looks, like I was being ridiculous for questioning her. It wasn't the first time she'd been distant, but this felt different. She became more self-absorbed, spending more time on her phone, staring at herself in the mirror for longer stretches. I would hear her on the phone, her voice getting that pitch when she's trying too hard to sound normal, you know? Derek, stop worrying. It's nothing. Just work stuff, she'd say, but it wasn't the words that gave it away. It was the tone. She had a way of brushing me off like I was a nuisance, like I didn't matter. And I guess, in a way, I had gotten used to it. But then the plans for the adoption fell apart. That's when everything really started to unravel. We'd been talking about it for years, ever since we first got married. Adopting a child. Giving a kid a home. Something we both said we wanted. I had gone to meetings, we'd filled out paperwork, met with social workers. And then, right before the final step, Vivian backed out. I'm just not ready, she said, tears in her eyes, like it was my fault she was suddenly so uncertain. I thought I was, but I can't do this. Not now. Not when everything's so unsettled. I remember sitting there, looking at her, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I could tell she was upset, genuinely upset, but it didn't make sense. We'd been planning this for months. I'd given up my weekends to attend parenting classes, read adoption books, everything. But Vivian just didn't want it anymore. She pulled out at the last minute, leaving me standing there, holding the empty promises of a future we had already dreamed up. A few weeks later, I found out why. She had already found someone else. I can't even begin to explain the rage I felt when the pieces started to fit together. It wasn't just a simple affair. It was everything. The lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for our life together. It was like I'd been living in a fog, and suddenly, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Her affair wasn't just with some random guy. No, this was with a guy who knew exactly what he was doing. Jonas. He was a massage therapist she met at this high-end spa she started going to. At first, I thought maybe it was just a harmless fling, something temporary. But then I started seeing the signs. The long absences, the cryptic text messages, the way she acted like I was the problem whenever I brought it up. Jonas wasn't just charming. He was calculating. The kind of guy who could say the right things at the right time, make you feel special, make you feel like you mattered. And Vivian? Well, she had always craved attention. She'd always been a little vain, if I'm being honest. But I never thought it would lead her down this path. Looking back, I should have confronted her sooner. But I wasn't stupid. I knew if I didn't have proof, if I didn't have something concrete, she'd just turn it around on me, make me feel crazy for accusing her. So I waited. I watched. I collected evidence. And eventually, it all came crashing down. It was late one night when I finally got the confirmation. I had a feeling, you know? When you've been married to someone for years, you pick up on the little things, the way they move, the way they speak, the things they avoid. But it wasn't until I started looking through her phone that I knew. I know, it's not something I'm proud of, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. And once you've got that gut feeling, you can't just ignore it. Vivian had been working late, for a week straight. She'd come home exhausted, her eyes red like she'd been crying. I'd ask what happened, and she'd just shrug it off. But it didn't add up. It didn't fit. The time she was supposed to be at the office didn't match up with her actual schedule, and I started checking her phone. I know it's an invasion of privacy, but after everything, after the adoption falling through, the distance, the lies, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. There were texts, too many texts, not just with Jonas, but other messages that left no room for doubt. The way they spoke to each other, the code words, the promises to meet up again, the little hints about what they'd done. It was all there, laid out in black and white. She had been seeing him for weeks, maybe months. And I wasn't just some guy she was sleeping with on the side. No, this was her second life. She had been living it right under my nose, like I was a fool who couldn't see past her smile. I could feel my hands shaking as I scrolled through the messages. One of them had a hotel reservation in it. A place I recognized. It was just down the road, some boutique hotel she'd always said was too expensive. But that night, she'd checked in there with Jonas. The proof was in my hands, and I knew I couldn't go back. There was no more denying it. But I wasn't going to make a scene. I knew Vivian well enough to understand she'd just deflect, play the victim. She'd twist everything around until it was my fault, so I decided I'd handle it quietly, calmly, at first. I stayed up that night, going over everything in my head. I was angry, sure, but the rage came in waves. What burned in me the most was the betrayal. The way she could look me in the eye every day and lie to me without a second thought. She had been pulling away for months, and I had no idea why. I had no idea what was happening behind closed doors, behind the facade she put on for me, for everyone. The next morning, I didn't say anything to her. I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. I had to think about what I was going to do next. I decided to give it one more day. I wanted to see if she'd slip up, if she'd give me some sort of opening. And sure enough, later that afternoon, I noticed her slip away again, making some excuse about meeting a friend. That's when I grabbed my coat, walked out the door, and followed her. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to let her see me coming. I trailed her at a distance, keeping my cool, making sure she didn't suspect a thing. And sure enough, she led me straight to that hotel. I stood across the street, watching her walk in with Jonas, her hand on his arm, laughing like she was some teenager out on a date. My heart dropped. It felt like the world was sinking beneath me. This wasn't just an affair. This was everything. Everything we had built together, everything I had trusted her with, gone in an instant. I stayed there, frozen, for what felt like hours, watching them disappear inside. And then it hit me. I didn't just have to be angry. I could do something. I could make this right. I knew what I had to do next. I didn't rush it. I took my time, letting everything sink in. The last thing I wanted was to make some rash decision, to confront Vivian while I was still in a fury. No, I needed to be smart about this. Calm. Strategic. The next morning, when she came home from her meeting with Jonas, I was waiting. She had that look on her face, the one she'd been wearing for weeks, like she was trying to convince herself everything was normal. She walked in like nothing had changed, like I hadn't been following her the night before. I could tell she didn't expect me to know anything, and that made it all the more satisfying. "Hey babe," she said, tossing her keys on the counter and walking past me. "I'm so tired. Long day. Can you make dinner tonight?" I didn't say a word. Just stood there, staring at her, watching her. And that's when she finally looked up, noticing the silence hanging in the air. Her eyes flickered for just a second, but she quickly recovered, flashing that fake smile of hers. "What's up?" she asked, her voice laced with a little too much sweetness, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I spoke, calm and cold, almost like I wasn't speaking to the woman I had married, but to a stranger. "Do you want to explain something to me, Vivian?" Her smile faltered just a little, but she kept it in place. "What do you mean?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Without saying another word, I turned the screen to face her. There it was, clear as day. A picture of her walking into that hotel with Jonas, hand in hand, smiling like she was the happiest woman alive. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment I thought she might say something, anything to defend herself, but she didn't. Instead, she blinked rapidly, trying to process what was happening. Then, just as I'd expected, she went on the defensive. That's not what it looks like, she snapped, her voice high-pitched now, her usual confidence cracking. It was just a massage. You don't understand, Derek. It's not. Not what? I cut her off, keeping my tone even, no anger in my voice, just pure exhaustion. You don't need to explain, Vivian. I've got all the details. You're not fooling me anymore. She looked like she might cry, but instead of apologizing, instead of coming clean, she doubled down. I can't believe you're doing this. I'm the one who's been trying to make this work, and you're here accusing me of. She stopped herself and looked away, clearly struggling to keep her composure. I didn't want to hurt you, Derek. I didn't want it to end like this. But you weren't there for me. You never really saw me anymore. I felt like I was going to snap. She was lying, and it was like a slap in the face. I could feel my blood pressure rising, my fists clenching at my sides. But I didn't let myself lose control. Not yet. I was there for you, Vivian, I said, slowly and deliberately. But you weren't. Not for a long time. You pulled away, you shut me out, and you let that thing, Jonas, fill the space I used to. You're right about one thing, though. You didn't want to hurt me. You just didn't care enough to worry about what you were doing to me. Her face twisted then, like she was struggling to make sense of what was happening. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to come up with something, anything that would make it all right again. But nothing could. You don't understand. I've been so lost, Derek. She started, but I wasn't having it anymore. No. You don't get to play the victim here, I interrupted, shaking my head. You betrayed me, Vivian. You betrayed us. All for what? Some guy who probably doesn't give a damn about you? You think Jonas is going to be there for you when things get tough? You think he cares about you the way I did? No, he's just a guy who knows how to get under your skin. And you fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. And that's when I knew I had her. I stood there for a moment, watching her, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make it feel less like a total loss. But there was nothing. Just silence. Then I took a step forward, my voice dropping into something darker, colder. I'm done with the lies, Vivian. You've made your choice, and so have I. But I'm not going to let you walk away from this without facing the consequences. She opened her mouth, like she was going to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, looking at me, knowing that everything between us had shattered in that instant. And that was just the beginning. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, but it was exactly what I needed. It gave me the chance to think, really think, about what I was going to do next. She stood there, frozen, her eyes red, her posture tense like a cornered animal. I could feel her trying to process it all, but it was too late. The truth was out, and now, everything was going to change. I'm not going to make this easy for you, Vivian, I said, my voice calm but hard. It was like I had flipped a switch. I wasn't the guy who had been humiliated anymore. I wasn't the guy who was just going to sit back and accept being the fool. Now I was the one who controlled the narrative. You've made a mess of everything, and now it's time for you to deal with the consequences. She took a step back, looking like she was about to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. I wasn't interested in her excuses. Not anymore. I don't need your apologies, I told her, my eyes narrowing. What I need is for you to understand what you've done. You think you can just waltz into a hotel room with some guy and leave me picking up the pieces? That's not how this is going to work. Vivian opened her mouth again, but I saw the wheels turning in her head. She was about to cry, or beg, or try to explain it all away. I wasn't having it. Not this time. I'm going to make sure you pay for this, Vivian, I continued, taking a step closer. You've done enough damage, and now it's my turn to make sure you see the price of your choices. Her face twisted into something like disbelief, like she didn't understand what I was saying. What are you talking about? Derek, please. I raised my hand again, cutting her off. You don't get to talk your way out of this anymore, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm done listening. It's over. I turned away from her, not waiting for her response. I could feel the weight of everything, the rage, the hurt, the betrayal, burning inside me. But I wasn't going to let myself be reckless. I had a plan, and I was going to follow through. As I walked out of the room, I could hear Vivian calling my name. Derek, wait. Please, we need to talk about this. But I didn't stop. I didn't even turn around. I had made my decision. She was going to face what she had done, whether she liked it or not. The first thing I did was make a call to my lawyer. I'd been putting it off for months, but now, there was no more hesitation. It was time to start the process. The divorce wasn't going to be quick or easy. I knew that, but it was the only way forward. Vivian had chosen her path, and now I was choosing mine. I didn't care what she thought about the divorce. I didn't care about her sob stories, her pleading, or her guilt trips. All I cared about was making sure I wasn't the one who was left holding the bag when everything fell apart. She had done enough to me, and now it was time to make sure she understood the depth of what she'd lost. The lawyer I called was a pit bull. Someone who didn't play games. I told him everything. The affair. The lies. The adoption falling through. And most importantly, I told him I wanted the divorce to be as painful and drawn out as possible. No quick settlements. No amicable agreements. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal. She'd made her choices, and now it was time to make her pay. The lawyer's response was simple. We'll make sure she knows exactly what's coming. You won't be taken advantage of. I hung up the phone and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't relief. No, it was something colder, something darker. The rage that had been building up for weeks now felt focused, controlled. I wasn't going to just walk away from this. Vivian had taken everything from me, and now, I was going to take it all back. I spent the rest of the day making arrangements, tying up loose ends. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore. No, it was about showing her exactly what betrayal looked like when you'd crossed the wrong person. I didn't tell her about the lawyer. I didn't tell her about the steps I was taking. I didn't need to. She'd figure it out soon enough. Later that night, she came home again, probably expecting me to be emotional, maybe even weak, ready to listen to whatever excuse she had prepared. But when I didn't say anything, when I just kept quiet and focused on my work, making calls, handling the business, I could see the unease settle into her face. Derek, she started, her voice hesitant, almost too sweet. I know I've messed up, but we can fix this. Don't. I cut her off again, not even looking up from my phone. You don't get to fix anything. You've made your choices, Vivian. And now I'm going to make mine. She was quiet after that, and I could tell it was starting to sink in. I was done. And she wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of this one. The next day, I did something else I knew would get her attention. I called up our joint accounts, our savings, the retirement fund, everything. I had a friend at the bank freeze all of it. Vivian would never know what hit her. The moment I froze the accounts, I knew it was only a matter of time before Vivian would come knocking, demanding answers. She wouldn't understand at first, she never did, but I could feel it in my bones that it was the right move. She had spent years using me for comfort, for stability, without any real regard for the emotional toll it was taking on me. Well, now it was my turn to disrupt her life the same way she'd disrupted mine. It didn't take long. That afternoon, she barged into the living room, her eyes wide with confusion and anger. Her voice, usually so smooth, was now laced with panic. Derek, what the hell did you do? She snapped, dropping a stack of bills onto the coffee table. I tried to pay the credit card bill, but it's like, nothing's there. Our accounts are all frozen. What's going on? I didn't even flinch. I just kept sitting there, on the couch, staring at my phone, pretending like I wasn't bothered. I let her stew in her frustration for a minute, watching as she fumbled with her purse and keys, probably trying to make sense of it all. Then I looked up, slowly, meeting her gaze with that same icy calm I'd been carrying all day. I froze everything, I said, my voice flat, like I was telling her I'd taken the trash out. I told you, Vivian, I'm done. And now you're gonna feel what it's like to lose everything. No more easy access to my money, no more cushy lifestyle. Her face twisted in disbelief. You're punishing me, she asked, almost incredulously. Because I made a mistake? Derek, please, you don't understand. I'm trying to fix things here. I stood up then, finally, and met her in the middle of the room. I could see the panic starting to break through her usual deflection. She was starting to realize just how deep she was in it. Fix things? I repeated, shaking my head. You think this is about fixing things? You think you can just waltz back into my life and act like nothing happened? You've been sleeping with another guy for God knows how long, Vivian. And you think a few "I'm sorries" are going to fix it? No. You're going to feel the consequences. All of them. Her eyes filled with anger now, but I saw something else. Fear. Real fear. The kind of fear you get when you realize you've pushed someone too far and now they're not playing by the same rules anymore. You don't have the right to do this, she hissed, stepping closer to me, her voice shaking. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to feel trapped, to feel like I was suffocating in this marriage. I cut her off again, my voice rising now. You didn't ask for this? You didn't ask for what? To cheat on me? To destroy everything we built? You didn't ask for any of this, but you sure as hell made the choice to do it. And now? Now it's my turn to make the choice. She stared at me, open-mouthed, probably trying to figure out if I was serious. And when she realized I was, when she finally saw that I wasn't going to back down, that was when the dam really broke. I can't believe you're doing this, she whispered, her voice so small now, it almost sounded like she was pleading. You really want to destroy me, don't you? The truth was, I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to understand what she'd done, and for once, I didn't care if that meant she hated me for it. I was tired of being the one who had to swallow my feelings while she did whatever the hell she wanted, without a second thought for anyone but herself. Do you really think I'm the one who's destroying things here? I asked her, my voice cold and measured. You've been destroying us for months. You've been living this secret life behind my back, lying to my face, and you think I'm the bad guy? You're the one who's betrayed me, Vivian. You're the one who killed this marriage. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't want to hear it. I knew it was pointless. She'd never take responsibility, not really. She'd just twist everything around until it was somehow my fault, and I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. I've had enough of your excuses, I told her, my voice finally losing its patience. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. No more money from me. No more cushy life. You want to act like I'm the villain? Fine. But you're going to see what that really looks like when you don't have a safety net to fall back on anymore. I watched her face fall as she processed my words. For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about everything she had taken for granted. Her comfortable life, the security I had provided her, the future we had planned. All of it was slipping away, and I wasn't going to let her blame me for it. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, staring at me, maybe trying to figure out what to do next. But whatever she thought was coming, it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. The next few days were a blur. Vivian started to crumble under the pressure, calling her lawyer, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. But I could see the change in her. She wasn't as confident anymore. The high-maintenance, self-absorbed woman I'd been living with for so long was now exposed, vulnerable, and desperate. And I wasn't going to give her the mercy she was looking for. No, I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had caused. Starting with the next step. After the financial shock had set in, I knew I needed to hit Vivian where it would hurt the most, her reputation. See, Vivian always prided herself on her social standing. She loved being the center of attention at every gathering, the woman with the perfect smile, the perfect wardrobe, the perfect life. But behind all that, she was a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. And if there was one thing I knew, it was that she couldn't stand being exposed. So, while she was busy scrambling to salvage whatever she could from the wreckage of our marriage, I started working behind the scenes. I didn't do it out of some twisted sense of malice, but because Vivian needed to understand that she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. And sometimes, people don't learn until their reputation, the thing they care most about, comes crashing down around them. I started small at first, just letting a few close friends know about the affair. I didn't even have to say much. They already knew Vivian had been acting strange for months, always working late or disappearing for days at a time. All I had to do was confirm what they already suspected. And once one person knew, Word spread fast. At first, I kept it quiet. I didn't want to look like I was trying to ruin her just for the sake of it. But I knew that once the truth got out, there was no going back. So, I let it build. I let the whispers start, knowing it would all snowball. Vivian would try to cover it up, of course. She'd try to spin some story, deny everything, claim it wasn't true. But by then, it wouldn't matter. And then came the day that Vivian's carefully constructed world came crashing down. I got a call from one of her co-workers, a woman who had always been friendly with both of us, but who I had started talking to after everything went down. She was the one who'd given me the heads up about an upcoming meeting at Vivian's office. She didn't know the full details, but she told me that Vivian was going to be presenting at a big company event in front of dozens of her colleagues, her bosses included. That was my moment. I didn't waste any time. I arranged for an anonymous email to be sent to the entire office, an email that included everything. Pictures of Vivian and Jonas, the hotel check-ins, the texts. It was all there. No guessing, no half-truths. Just the raw evidence of what Vivian had been doing behind my back. I made sure the email hit right before the event, so it would be the last thing anyone would expect. I waited. I was pacing around my apartment when I heard the first buzz of my phone. It was a message from my lawyer. Vivian is already in damage control mode. She's trying to explain things away, but it's not working. The damage is done. I didn't care. I didn't care how much she tried to clean up her mess. The truth was out. And now, she had to face it. That afternoon, the calls started coming in. Friends I hadn't talked to in months were reaching out, either trying to check in on me or, in some cases, express their surprise, though none of them were surprised. They'd all known there was something off. People had seen the way Vivian had pulled away, how she'd started showing up late to social gatherings with Jonas always close behind her. It felt good, in a way. A sense of power I hadn't had in years. I wasn't the one on the receiving end of the gossip anymore. No, I was the one making it. And if Vivian thought she could ignore the fallout, she was wrong. It wasn't just my life she'd ruined, it was hers, too. But that was only the start. The next day, Vivian came home early, looking like she had seen a ghost. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes were bloodshot, and her shoulders were slumped like she had just carried the weight of the world on her back. She wasn't even trying to pretend that everything was fine anymore. She came into the living room, where I was sitting on the couch, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "Derek, you've gone too far. I don't know what kind of person you've become, but this isn't you. You want revenge, fine. But you've ruined everything. Everyone knows now. My job, my friends, everything. It's all falling apart, and it's your fault." I didn't even look at her. I just kept staring straight ahead, as though she were the one who had wronged me. She was still trying to make this about me, like I was the villain in her little story. "No," I said, my voice steady but cutting through the silence like a knife. "You're the one who ruined everything. You made your choices. Vivian. You wanted to lie, cheat, and hurt me? Fine. But now you get to feel what it's like when the truth comes out. You don't get to walk away from this without consequences." She took a step forward, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Derek. I was confused. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, please, I'll do anything to fix this. Please don't destroy me. I'll go to therapy, I'll change, I raised my hand, signaling for her to stop. "It's too late. The damage is done. I'm done." Vivian crumpled onto the couch beside me, her hands trembling. "Please, Derek. Please, don't do this." I turned to her then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw her for what she really was. Someone who had built her whole life around appearances, around maintaining the perfect image. And now, that image was shattered. "I didn't do this to you, Vivian. You did this to yourself," I told her, keeping my voice even. "You're the one who decided to sleep with another man, to lie to me for months. You're the one who destroyed your own reputation. I'm not the one who's ruined your life. You did that. And now it's time for you to face it." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. For the first time, Vivian didn't have a comeback. She just sat there, staring at the floor, utterly defeated. But the worst was yet to come. There were still a few more people I needed to take down. Not for me, but for the truth. Jonas wasn't going to get away with it either. I still had a few cards left to play, and I wasn't done yet. I knew I wasn't done. Vivian was just the first step. The real target, the one who needed to be taken down the hardest, was Jonas. He was the smooth-talking bastard who had been playing the victim, making Vivian feel special while she tore apart the life I thought we had. Jonas wasn't some random affair. No, he was a predator. Someone who saw an opportunity in a vulnerable woman and took it. He wasn't going to get off easy. I'd already dug into his background. After everything that had happened, I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I didn't just want him out of Vivian's life. I wanted him exposed for what he really was. And I wasn't about to let him walk away without paying a price. I had his number from one of the messages I found on Vivian's phone weeks ago, and after that, it didn't take long to find out where he worked. It wasn't hard to figure out which spa he operated out of, either. He'd made sure his name was attached to his business, probably thinking it gave him credibility. Well, now I was going to use that against him. One evening, I decided to go pay him a visit. I wasn't going to be confrontational, not yet. I wanted to see how far I could push him without him even realizing it. So I showed up at the spa during his shift. The place was quiet, calming, with soft music playing in the background and the smell of lavender in the air. Typical high-end spa atmosphere, like he was some kind of professional. Jonas was standing behind the front desk when I walked in. He didn't recognize me at first, so I kept my head low and approached him casually, pretending to browse the spa menu. When I got close enough, I glanced up and saw him. He was in his mid-30s, well-groomed with that too-polished look that always screamed, someone who's full of himself. The moment he saw me, his smile froze for a second, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He must have realized who I was, but he wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. I nodded at him, acting like everything was fine, even though my insides were burning. Hey man, you're Jonas, right? I've heard a lot about you. His smile returned, but this time it was guarded. Yeah, that's me. How can I help you? I didn't waste any time. I'm Derek, I said, slowly letting the name sink in. Vivian's husband. His face went pale, just like I'd hoped it would. For a second, he looked like he might lose it, but then he caught himself. He straightened up, trying to recover some of that confident charm. Ah, right. Derek. Good to meet you, man. I didn't realize. Well, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Vivian and we've been just... I cut him off, not giving him a chance to spin some lie. I know what's been going on, I said, my voice low, controlled. And I'm not here to cause a scene, at least not yet. But you and I need to have a little chat, and you're going to listen. You see, Jonas, I've got a lot of things on you. Things that could ruin your business, your reputation, everything you've worked so hard to build. And believe me, I'm not afraid to make them public. His smile faltered, and I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He was trying to play it cool, but I could see right through him. I didn't need to say much more. He already knew what was coming. You think I'm bluffing? I asked him, leaning in just slightly, making him feel the weight of the moment. I've got hotel reservations, messages, photos, all of it. I could send it out to your clients, your colleagues, your entire social circle, and watch your little business crash and burn. So here's what I want you to do, Jonas. You're going to cut things off with Vivian. You're going to leave her alone, and you're going to stay the hell away from her. If I hear you've contacted her again, or if I find out you've done anything that even remotely looks like you're trying to rekindle things, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you really are. His face drained of color. This wasn't just a casual affair. This was his livelihood on the line. He was a massage therapist with a reputation to protect, but his reputation meant nothing to me now. I can't. Jonas started to stutter, trying to think of a way out. Look, man, No excuses, I interrupted, my tone steely. You're not going to get away with this. You know it, I know it. You made your choices. Now you're going to live with the consequences. And if you're smart, you'll disappear from Vivian's life. For good. Jonas looked like he was about to argue, but then he just nodded slowly, realizing there was no getting out of it. I had him. The fear in his eyes said everything. He was cornered. I'll break it off. I swear, he muttered, his voice shaking. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was a smile of warning. You better. Because if you don't, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what kind of man you are. I'm not kidding. I stood up and turned to leave, but before I walked out, I stopped, glanced over my shoulder, and gave him one last piece of advice. Next time, don't mess with a guy who's already lost everything. I have nothing to lose now. As I walked out, I could feel the weight of what I had just done settle over me. It wasn't just about taking Vivian down. It was about making sure that her affair, her entire deception, didn't just ruin me. No, I was going to make sure it ruined everything she'd built, and that included Jonas. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. After I took care of Jonas, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Vivian wasn't going to give up easily. She had been backed into a corner, but I could see her trying to claw her way out. I wasn't about to let her wriggle free. If I was going to walk away from this marriage, it wasn't going to be without making sure she fully understood the gravity of what she'd done. The divorce proceedings started quickly. Too quickly, if you ask me. But Vivian didn't seem to think things through. She thought she could play it cool, that if she just agreed to some quick and painless settlement, she could put everything behind her and move on with her life. But she didn't realize that I had already planned for the long game. I wasn't about to make it easy for her. I hired the best damn lawyer I could find. Someone who was known for dragging things out, for making the process as painful as possible. Vivian thought I was just going to hand her the house, give her a quick settlement, and be done with it. She was wrong. The more she pushed for a quick settlement, the more I pushed back. One of the first things Vivian tried to do was take the house. I had already taken steps to protect my assets, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with everything. I had our joint accounts frozen, and I started moving money around. I wasn't doing this out of spite. Well, maybe a little, but mostly, I wanted to make sure that Vivian couldn't just slip into another comfortable life with the same entitlement she had before. She had always expected me to pick up the slack, to handle the tough stuff while she enjoyed the rewards of her selfishness. But now, the rug was pulled out from under her. In the first round of the divorce proceedings, Vivian tried to paint herself as the victim. She claimed she was misunderstood, that she didn't mean for things to spiral out of control. The usual garbage. She even went as far as saying she was sorry for what she'd done and begged me for reconciliation. But when I showed up to court with evidence, texts, emails, and the photos from the hotel room, her face went pale. She couldn't deny anything. That's when I started to see the cracks in her armor. She tried to keep up the bravado, but she couldn't stop the tremors in her voice whenever she was on the stand. She tried to explain herself, but it wasn't about explaining anymore. The jury could see her for what she was. A liar, a cheater, a woman who'd selfishly destroyed everything for a fleeting moment of pleasure. I made sure the media got wind of it, too. I knew it was going to be messy, but I wanted everyone to see who Vivian really was. She wasn't going to get away with making me look like the bad guy while she pranced around playing the victim. I wasn't going to let that happen. The divorce was becoming a spectacle, and Vivian hated it. Every day, she came home looking more defeated. At first, she tried to guilt-trip me, saying how much I was hurting her. How she didn't deserve this. She even started crying in front of me at one point, pleading for me to reconsider. But I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, cold as ice, and said, "You didn't give me a choice. This is the life you chose." I knew she was feeling the pressure. The friends who had once rallied around her were beginning to fall silent, some even reaching out to me, offering their condolences, asking if they could do anything to help. It was strange at first, but the more people reached out, the more I started to see just how far Vivian had gone. She was losing her grip on everything, and it felt good to watch. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. One night, after a particularly exhausting round of legal back and forth, I sat down with my lawyer. I had another move in mind, one that would really hit Vivian hard. She loved to play the perfect wife, the perfect image, but she was only that in front of other people. Privately, she had been a different person, and I was going to make sure everyone knew that. I had the idea to expose her betrayal to everyone in our social circle, the people who had once been our closest friends, the ones who had admired us as a couple. I was going to make sure they knew exactly what kind of woman Vivian was, and not just the glamorous, perfect wife she wanted them to see. So, I arranged for an anonymous tip-off. I gathered all the evidence, photos, texts, the hotel footage, and I sent it to every mutual friend we had. I made sure it was clear. Vivian had destroyed our marriage with her affair. She had ruined everything, and now she had to deal with the fallout. The next day, the texts and messages started pouring in. People reached out, some offering me sympathy, others just saying they were shocked. I didn't care about the sympathy. I cared about seeing Vivian suffer. When I called her the next morning, her voice was trembling, shaky, like she was on the verge of a breakdown. "You had to do this, didn't you?" she said, barely able to hold it together. "You couldn't just let it go. You had to ruin everything." I didn't respond right away. I let her stew in her anger for a moment. Then I finally spoke. "No. You ruined everything. You did this. You made the choice to cheat. You made the choice to lie. And now you get to face it. You get to face the consequences of everything you've done." Vivian didn't say anything after that. She couldn't. There was nothing left to say. She had no excuses, no way out. The walls were closing in on her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way I thought I would. It wasn't about gloating or rubbing her face in it. It was about justice. It was about making sure she understood the price she'd paid for her betrayal. The same way I had to live with the consequences of her actions, she was going to live with hers. For the rest of her life. The divorce was far from over, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the broken man she'd left behind. I was the one in control now. And Vivian? Well, she was about to learn that everything she took for granted was about to be stripped away, one piece at a time. The months dragged on, each day another reminder of how far Vivian had pushed me, how much she'd torn apart. But through all the anger, the courtroom battles, and the petty games she played to try and make me feel guilty, I found something I didn't expect. I found peace. Not all at once, but little by little, it started to creep in. The more Vivian fought to keep control of the narrative, the more I realized I didn't need to fight back with the same rage. I didn't have to keep proving a point. Her own actions were doing all the work for me. She could cry, beg, or play the victim all she wanted, but it was clear to everyone who had been watching that she was a liar, a cheat, and a woman who couldn't face the consequences of her own choices. Meanwhile, my life was changing for the better, even though I wasn't actively seeking a fresh start at first. My friends, the ones who had reached out, had become a source of real support. A lot of people I'd pushed aside over the years, because Vivian and I were always too busy for anyone else, had rallied around me. There were nights I spent catching up with old friends over beers, talking about the things I'd lost, the things I'd learned, and what I wanted moving forward. I felt lighter, more myself than I had in years. I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump into another relationship just yet, but that didn't mean I was going to let Vivian's betrayal define me. I focused on the things I wanted for my life, things that had always been pushed aside. For years I had wanted to adopt. I knew that, deep down, Vivian had never truly shared that vision. She'd been too caught up in her own world, her own selfish pleasures to really think about building a family the way I had. She didn't care. But I did. I always had. So, I took the steps. I started the adoption process on my own. It wasn't easy, but it was one of the most fulfilling decisions I'd ever made. It felt like reclaiming a piece of my future. I wasn't just a guy left behind by a wife who couldn't care less about the life we had planned. I was someone building a new chapter, and I was going to do it on my own terms. Then there was the unexpected surprise. Love. It didn't come rushing in, but I met someone, a woman who had been through her own struggles, her own pain. And she understood me in a way Vivian never had. It was quiet at first, just a few casual dates. But the connection grew, naturally, as I began to let go of the past and embrace what was right in front of me. It felt different this time. Real. I wasn't looking to heal from anything anymore. I was just looking to build something better with someone who appreciated me for exactly who I was. As for Vivian, she couldn't stay in denial forever. The house went up for sale, and she had to find her own place. When I saw her again, it wasn't in a courtroom or in some heated argument. It was at a mutual friend's dinner party, one of the few times we'd been in the same room since everything exploded. I could tell she was trying to keep her head high, but it wasn't working. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had crushed her down. She tried to pull me aside, but I wasn't having it. "You're not getting any more sympathy from me, Vivian," I said, calm but firm. "You chose this, and now you get to live with it. But I'm done." She didn't argue. She just nodded, almost like she knew it was true. The woman who had betrayed me, the woman who thought she could have it all, was now facing a reality she wasn't ready for. And I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore. I walked away from that dinner party feeling free. Completely free. Vivian's life seemed to crumble in the months that followed. Her friends, the ones who had once been loyal to her, began to pull back. She was seen as the woman who had wrecked her marriage for an affair, the woman who had selfishly sabotaged a future that could have been beautiful. As the gossip spread, I noticed the change. She was no longer the charming, elegant woman at the center of attention. People looked at her differently. They saw her for who she truly was. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. I adopted a child, a beautiful little girl who was everything I had wanted and more. I watched her grow, become part of my new world, and I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't going to live in the past anymore. I wasn't going to let the betrayal define me. I was going to build something new. And that's what I did. I built a life for myself. One that was full of hope, full of love, and full of promise. Vivian? Well, she had to live with the consequences of her actions. I don't know what her life looks like now, and honestly, I don't care. The woman who left me broken, the woman who tore our lives apart for her own selfish desires, she's gone. And in her place, there's a man who learned from the pain, rebuilt from the wreckage, and is now stronger than ever. The truth is, I didn't need revenge. In the end, I got something better. I got my life back, and that was more than enough.